Hello everyone, and thanks for watching the Fast Track Tutorials YouTube channel. If you end up liking this tutorial, then make sure to check out our full courses. The links to these are posted in the description. So in this course, I want to go over on how to create a really nice and quick material render inside of Marmoset Toolbag 4. Now you can use Marmoset Toolbag 3 for this, but because Marmoset Toolbag 4 supports ray tracing, that is the reason why I am using this version. So we are going to go for like a sphere render. I'm sure you've seen it, that we call them material balls. They're just like a sphere with our material on it. Now the first thing that you of course then need is you do need a sphere model. However, if you are rendering out materials, I am kind of going to assume that you probably have Substance Designer and else you have at least like a 3D modeling program. So for Substance Designer actually comes with a material sphere. So if you would go to your Substance Designer installation folder, and if you then go to Resources, View 3D, and Shapes, in here you actually have a few very nice previewers. So I'm just going to go for the sphere to tiles. The other option is to simply go into a 3D package, create a sphere, add enough polygons to that, so just subdivide it a few times so that you have like a nice dense amount of polygons, and then showcased here. Here I can show you, if we go to our wireframe, you can see that this is quite a dense sphere, and that's quite important because we want to get displacement. So, we got our sphere. I do assume that you know a little bit of the basics of Marmoset, like moving around, which is just Alt left mouse button, Alt middle mouse button is panning, and Alt right mouse button or scroll wheel is zooming in. So it's super basic stuff. For the rest, Marmoset Toolbag is such a nice and easy program to use. So, we got our sphere here, which I just dragged in. The next thing is going to be our material. Now, if you want, you can create a new material, but I'm just going to go ahead and use the default. And we are going to use, so I got this material. It's a bit old. I made it like 2 years ago, so I hope it still looks good. And if it doesn't look good, I will probably re-record this with a different material. So if you're seeing this, it looked good. Anyway, we need a displacement map over here. I'm also going to just drop down the texture, because here we can control the texture tiling, because we do often want to tile the texture a few times. So displacement or height map is needed to do actual geometry displacement. We need a norm map, albedo map, roughness map. We don't need a metallic map because this texture is of broken concrete or broken tarmac, so it doesn't actually have a metallic map. And down here we need an occlusion map. Now I'm going to get started by just importing my albedo map, which is your base color. Let's import first of all then our normal map, our roughness map, our AO map, and I'm always doing the displacement last because I first now want to check out the tiling. So this is looking pretty bad, so let's set the tiling first of all to like 2 over here. Yeah, I think 2 should work, maybe 1.5. When it comes to these kind of renders, you can go in uneven numbers. It's not too bad. I do try to always keep even numbers if I can. But let's go for this. Now, before I want to play around with my displacement, the next thing that I want to do is I want to quickly create a camera so that I have like a proper front-facing view of my scene. Super easy. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to go up here and press the new camera, or you can right click and you can find all of these settings in here too. Now once you've done that, it will automatically assign the new camera down here. So we went from perspective to camera 1. And now what I'm going to show you is a technique which will put more focus on your material sphere and not so much on all the empty space around it. I'm sure you've often seen this, that material spheres are rendered in squares, but you can actually do this inside of Marmoset. It is very easy. All you need to do is go to Render inside Marmoset Toolbag 4. Inside Marmoset Toolbag 3, it's up here, Render and Render options. However, in number 4, all you need to do is go to the Render, scroll down, and you want to set your output resolution on your image to an even number. In this case, I'm going to go for 1920 by 1920, so that it becomes square. Now, if you go to your camera 1, all you need to do is turn on Save Frames and set the frame opacity all the way up. See? So now what happens is you draw full focus to this camera, or to this look. Now that we've done that, since we are in the camera, I can just do like a few things. What I always tend to do is I always tend to set my sharpening a little bit higher, just to give it like a little bit more of like a crisp look. I tend to set my bloom around the same level as my size, which happens to be 0.001. And I always throw in like a little bit of vignetting, which is just some darkness in the corners, which will once again put more focus on your actual sphere. Now, once you've done that, there's a bunch of stuff that we're gonna go over later on, but for now, I just want to press this little lock button up here. This means that I cannot accidentally move around my material. And at this point, we can start with our displacement. So I'm going to just drag in my height map into my displacement, and this is what we get now. Now, this looks very bad. This is because we simply need more geometry. Right now, it is trying to do its best with the geometry we have, but we need to go into our sphere 2 tiles and click on our sphere. And we need to go ahead and we need to turn on subdivide. Now, there are a few modes over here, but Catmull Clark often works best. It can also go quite high. So basically, you want to boost up your subdivision levels quite a bit. So I think I'm going to go to around 4, which is 6 million triangles. And then I just want to move this down a bit. Now, it is still quite spiky up in this area, but I first want to get in a little bit of lighting, because when we use ray tracing, the lighting is calculated based upon geometry for a big part. And because of that, it can often look very jagged, and based upon that, I know like how much I need to increase my geometry and stuff like that. So, lighting. Let's get started with probably just dropping in an actual skylight to get started with. So I'm going to go to Art Lights and add a directional light over here, which is this one. When you have it selected, if you press W, or you can go to the buttons up here, you can move it around. And then if you press E, you can rotate it. So you basically want to rotate this. And I always go with materials like this for a 3-point lighting render. That means that I will have 3 different lights. I will have my main sunlight, which I always have in the top right corner. And that will cull around half over here. You can set your brightness way bigger. It will cull around half of my sphere. Let's say up until around this point. Now, of course, then set your brightness quite a bit lower. Play around and maybe set the color over here by simply clicking on the color. And sets like a little bit of like an orange color. I want to have this rendered as if that it's like a bit of a sunny day. So for now, we're just going to stick with this one light. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to work on a sky. Because a sky actually handles quite a bit of stuff. If you click on sky, right now it is an indoor parking lot, which doesn't really make sense for this material, of course. So we want to change our sky. Now, before we do that, once again, another thing to draw focus to your sphere is to go down here to the backdrop and set it to be a color. Once you set it to be a color, what you can do is you can click on color and you can make it like, I tend to often go for like darker colors, like very light blue, darker colors, because they simply draw in, all your eyes are now going towards your sphere. Like I'm not getting distracted by light colors surrounding it or anything like that. Now all I really need to do is I need to go to presets over here with our sky, and you have a lot of presets. So what I tend to do is I tend to just flick through like a few of them until I get something that I like. If you've never used it before, you need to double click on it twice because it first needs to download the first time. So here you can see that I'm gonna go for something that has like a little bit of a warm tone, and I want to go something that has quite strong shadows in it. But I don't want to go for like a night scene. Stuff in this direction. So alley, graffiti, stucco. Let's keep that one in mind. I do always, even if I think that I found it, I just want to have an extra look because there are so many, you never know what kind of cool stuff you find. You can also go down here in skies and actually sort this. So let's say, let's do actually morning, because morning often has like quite a nice looking sun. Alley, robot door, that might work. I don't really like these really blue pieces because our material is already quite bluish. So in this case, here, see there you saw me that I needed to double click on it. So in this case I'm gonna go for, I don't know, let's see. Courtyard, cobblestone, maybe. I will need to make my lighting, all of my lighting like a little bit stronger. I'm not going to click these. That's simply because I'm not in the mood to download them. Because I have not used them yet. Midday, let's just give midday a try. I won't do this too long, don't worry. Ooh, parking lot bikes. That I like that one the most right now, because it just has like that extra bit of look to it. Okay, so street costume, parking lot, bikes, and maybe one last sunset, because sunsets often have like field distant mountains. I think I like the parking lot bikes more. Parking ramp top also works quite well. Lots of parking. Okay, I'm gonna go for, what was it, morning parking. I think it was in here. No, I forgot. Parking lot midday. There we go, parking lot bikes. Let's go for this one. I quite like this one. Now, next thing is if you hold shift and you do a left mouse button, click and drag, you can see that you can control the actual rotation of your sky. I want to control it, and I will probably want to get more of the darkness of the sky down here in the bottom. So what we get now is we get like quite a strong contrast, but we will improve this, don't worry. But for now, it's already like something. Now, if I go to my light, I just want to set my brightness a little bit stronger, and I'm going to make the color a little bit more of like an orange color. It's just because I want to kind of like counteract the blue color that we have from our actual material over here. To just make it look like extra nice. So I'm gonna go for a strength of, or a brightness of 6.7 probably, something like that. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I do feel like that we want to probably do one last subdivision level, which will probably make my scene go quite a bit slower, but as long as I don't touch it, it should be fine. There we go. So I'm now at 24 million bolies, okay. Play around a little bit more with your height, there we go. And now what I'm going to do before, I'm going to turn on ray tracing, and then all of a sudden this scene will really pack a punch and it will look really cool. I first want to place some more lights. So as I said before, I go for a 3-point lighting system. We have our main light. Then we will have a rim light, which is going to go around the top here. And I like to go for a second rim light that has quite a bluish color or a white color down here. So the way that works is like this. We have over here, we have our normal light. If you just press W, you can see it. Now if you press Ctrl D, you will duplicate that light. And then for this light, what I'm going to do is set my brightness really high. And then I want to rotate this like this so that it just hits the back. See, so it becomes like that's what they call a rim light. So because it's just going around the very back. Then what you want to do is I tend to often just give it like a bit of like a stronger color and then tone down the brightness. And then sometimes when you tone down the brightness, you just need to add a little bit more rotation to this. But let's say something like this, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to make this the color a little bit less orange. Maybe make the contrast here, and it's also really nice because it will show off your roughness a little bit. So let's say something like this to get started with. Now I'm just going to press Ctrl D again, and this light needs to come from the very bottom like this. And this one is going to be, let's see, blue or pure white. Blue, I think I'm going to go for pure white. I think pure white looks quite nice. And this one will just be pushed down over here. Now, of course, what we will later get is we will get ambient occlusion, global illumination, and that will often handle quite a bit. So let's say something like this. So we now got these 3 lights ready to go. Now what we're going to do is we're really just going to work on the actual visuals of this. If we go to render, what we can do is we can turn on ray tracing. Now this will, in my case, slow down my PC quite a bit because I'm still waiting for the new graphics card to come out. So I'm still rocking a 1070 NVIDIA card. So turn it on. And what it will do is it will turn on ray tracing. I only need to turn it on once. It's really slow. There we go. Okay, and now you can see quite a bit changed. This is what I meant with that the shadows are being picked up with ray tracing using actual geometry. So knowing this, there's like a few things that we do need to work on. First of all, bounces of 1 is fine because it's a material. It's just a global illumination, how often the light bounces off your assets. This is better if you have like an interior scene, but for our scene, we don't need that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to tone down my displacement a little bit more. So I'm going to set it to around 0.02. And what you can see is that with the ray tracing, it often needs a second because it needs to load back in. And as soon as this loading bar is done, then what it will do is it will pop on the denoise, and then it will look a lot better. Now, of course, right now everything feels very blurry. So that is something we definitely need to work on. Let's start by just turning on my ambient occlusion over here. I'm going to turn on my local reflections and just throw those up to like 4. Because I just like to go for like a bunch of high quality stuff. Shadows, set them to mega so that they are extra high quality once again. And with everything just maxed out like this, for the rest you don't really need to do much about settings. All we need to do now is we of course need to play around a little bit more with our lighting and stuff like that. So if I have a look at this, I want to go and turn on my camera 1. I'm gonna start by just setting my sharpness a little bit higher. There we go. That might be a little bit too high, actually. Also, if you just go ahead and press this little gear icon over here, you just want to turn on, make sure that high DPI is turned on. This will basically just make sure that your scene looks extra nice. So high DPI is turned on, that is fine. Now what I'm going to do is, let's have a look. Let's play around with our bloom. Let's see if we can get like a little bit of like a tiny glow going on. Maybe it's a bit too strong. Let's set this to around 0.07, just to get, for like the strong lighting, get like a little bit of a glow. Now the next thing is going to be our shadows. So our shadows over here, they are right now a bit too strong. So what I'm trying to do is I'm first of all playing around with my actual main light to see if I can maybe reduce the strength of them. Another thing is that you can hold shift, and if you just rotate your sky around, you can see if that maybe like helps also a little bit. So, oops, let's go over here. I'm going to make this a little bit stronger. There we go. So something like this already starts to look a little bit better. I'm going to set my displacement probably to 0.018-ish. I don't want to have it as strong. Changing your displacement with ray tracing on is actually quite a lot slower than doing it without it, especially when you have 24 million polys. So there you go. And don't forget, you need to press your viewport in order to update it. So something like this looks quite decent, I would say. Yes. If you just go ahead and go to the sky, you can also control the sky brightness over here. And just to see, do we want, let's set this to 1.2. So I'm just going to give it like the tiniest bit of extra brightness in the sky. Now let's say that we have this. Okay, I'm going to go to my first light. I'm now just basically balancing. And I'm going to make my shadows a little bit more orange. So it's just going to be like a bit more of a warmer sun. Now a cool thing that you can do, if you go into your light and you go to your area and shape, you can actually soften out your shadows. So if you play with the diameter, now it's often a bit hard to see from like a distance. But here, it's really hard to see. You can soften out your shadows. Maybe I can see it better with this one. Here, see, you can see it a little bit. I know it's quite hard to see, but it is there. It's very subtle, but I basically always just like to move this around a little bit to give me a little bit more softer shadows, because on the material spheres, because everything is round, I don't often like these really, really strong shadows. So let's say something like this looks quite good. Okay, let's see what we have. I want to go to camera and I want to just do some more stuff over here. You can play around with your depth of field to get like the tiniest bit of blurring around these corners. Let's see if that looks good. It doesn't look good on every material. It looks good on materials that have very high or very strong displacement on them. But let's just turn on depth of field. And basically let's set the near blur all the way off, because I don't want to have any near blur. And then you just basically want to play around with your far blur and your focal distance. That's basically it. So if I just go over here, see? So this right now, it doesn't look too good. So now I'm just playing around with my far blur, and I'm just trying to get like a bit more of like a softer result. Okay, so we got that max bokeh size often does reduce the blur a little bit. I just want to see if I can get like the blur to be a little bit less intense. let's see. So before or with blur, without blur. See, you just get like the tiniest bit of like a softness around the edges, which often does look quite nice. So we got that stuff done. Another thing that's quite cool that you can play around with is the tone mapping. So the tone mapping, I often go for, wow, do I really need to pronounce this? H-E-J-L, that one. And basically this will give me a bit of like a stronger tone mapping, which does mean that I now need to just balance things out a little bit more by playing around with like my exposure. But I feel like that it does often give me like a slightly more realistic tone mapping. And here you can see, so this is quite nice. So it pops out the green quite a bit. Now I want to push that out a little bit more. However, in this specific case, I cannot just jump into my material and I can just make everything a little bit more green. So this is something that we are going to work on. I will, as like a quick extra bonus after this, just quickly jump into Photoshop and do some balancing. But I will try to do as much as I can in here. So you can play around with your contrast and set your contrast like a little bit higher, which will just give you some nicer contrast, or I guess some stronger contrast. And saturation is a bit of a double-edged sword, because yes, we can get like some nicer greens, but we also get stronger blues, and we don't really want that. So I might set my saturation to like 0.03 just to push it a little bit, but for the rest I'm quite happy with that. So let's have a look at our render once it is done. Okay, it still feels a little bit blurry. Now this can be mostly because of my actual texture, because as I said, this is an old texture. I've learned a lot of techniques after, which will make it feel less blurry. So in this case, I might just need to push on the sharpening a little bit more. But let's say that we got something like this. Yeah, I quite like that. Maybe I just want to play around a little bit more with just my lighting. Just maybe like the lighting brightness a little bit higher. 6.8 maybe. And also just play around a little bit more with like my colors. So maybe I want to make it like a little bit more of like a warmer color. This lighting over here. Let's see, if I set this, sometimes I just like to literally swap through the lighting just to see if there is maybe like something cool, because you never know, there could be like neon lights nearby, or like that you can make it as if that there are neon lights nearby and you can go for like some strong colors. Because right now I feel like we have a little bit too much of the yellow going on. So if I go for like a little bit more of like a bluish tone, how does that look? Okay, and if I now just rotate this a little bit. So yeah, the playing around with it just takes time. It's almost never that you can just instantly get something that looks exactly how you want without playing around with it. So let's say something like this. And then our third light, which is looking quite nice. I'm going to make it a little bit further in so that we can see a bit more of it. And then I'm just going to go ahead and maybe like play around a little bit more with the brightness. But there we go. So that actually looks like quite a nice render. So we got the lights done. We got our camera done, which we can, by the way, lock at this point. Just a quick cool thing if you want. You can click on your sphere, right click and add the turntable. And now when you press play down here, it rotates. Now, of course, you can play around with like your speed, like here, if it's like 0.2, for example. You can just get like some really nice turnarounds, and you can of course also render these out. And this is actually quite nice, because what I can do now is I can literally see where does my texture look best, from which angle. Like, do I want to go for maybe like having like the big concrete islands or the tarmac islands up here, or do I maybe want to go for like something more interesting? You can also play with your offset of your textures over here if you want to. It does the exact same thing, but it's often a bit slower than just doing this when we have ray tracing turned on. So I don't know. This is actually quite nice already, but that might just be because I'm used to seeing that look. Yeah, I just want to get like, let's see, I want to get some more interesting information where we have light. So I'm gonna go for, let's say this maybe. Sorry, I'm really picky. Now let's go for this, because then I get all this cool information. I get down here in the light, and I still get like a bunch of this stuff. So we got this piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and make a folder for my images. And then if you go to render, let's also turn on diffuse and specular in our ambient occlusion. It doesn't do much, but it does sometimes give like a nicer result. But let's go ahead and go into image, and then here we can set our output. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to render this out, in my case, as just a JPEG. So render A, for example, save. And now for the size, 1920 by 1920. I always like to go a bit higher, so I'm going to go for... I need to keep it square, 2560 by 2560, and then I just tend to lower it inside of Photoshop, which will often give me like a nicer result. Because you're downscaling it, it will soften the pixels a little bit. But I will show you what I mean with that. Samples, 256 is fine. If you want, you can go to like 512. Denoise strength is often always fine. The only thing that you want to do is, in order to actually render this, is go to render cameras and add your camera 1. And when you do that, if you turn off your main camera now, it will only render camera 1, which is of course our camera that we use for this render. So at that point, let's actually save our scene. And then we can go ahead and we can press render image. So that will quickly render image. I will pause the video until that is done. Here we go, so let's open this up. And now what I can see is that it still feels a little bit blurry. This often happens. There's always a slight difference between the sharpness that we see in here and the actual sharpness when we render it out. The easiest way to fix this is to simply go into your camera 1, set the sharpness a little bit higher, so it will look a little bit sharp for our view, but the render, it will just compensate with that. You can also go in and set your denoise strength a little bit lower. I'm gonna go for like 0.6. I'm just gonna delete my original render and just render this out once, but I find that it takes a bit too long, so I'm just going to set my samples to 256. And let's render this once more. Here we go, so let's have a look. There we go, you see, that looks already quite a bit nicer. There's also some optimization going on inside of the actual photo viewer, so it is always a bit sharper when you actually zoom in. So we got this stuff. Let's go ahead and open it up in Photoshop. And just as some super final polish, what I like to do, first of all, let's go to image size, and let's see how this looks if I set this to 1920 by 1920. So I downscale it a bit, but that often does give me like a slightly nicer and more relaxed view. So we got this stuff. Now to bring out the green a little bit more, to get started, let's go down here to the little round button, and let's go for Selective Color. What you can do with Selective Color is, based upon every color, you can go ahead and you can like play around with it. So I can say greens, and I can say I want to, in my greens, I always need to play around which one actually affects it. Here, see? So the cyan makes it look more yellow, or makes it look a little bit more green. And you can also play around with like your blackness to bring out the greens a little bit wherever you want. So here, see? So you just need to play around with the sliders. I tend to, because I always forget which ones do what. I tend to just play around with this. So I'm going to set my cyan to probably around plus 17. Magenta, I don't really care too much. Yellow, I don't really care too much. And blacks, I don't really care too much, because they don't do a lot. But yeah, like this, you can also go, for example, to blues. And in blues, you can go ahead and you can, let's see, which one affects the most. Here you can see like a little bit down here, but that's more in like the darkness areas. I'm more looking at this stuff, but I guess it is considered more gray. Yeah, here, or maybe it's in cyan. No, that's not the one. Here, most of this is being affected only where we have our actual shadows, but it makes sense that the shadows are blue, because the shadows cast the sky, and the sky always has some blue in it. It's some lighting thing. So I guess it is more neutral. Yeah, see here. So that's probably where it gets affected the most. But in neutral, I do not actually want to do too much stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to go ahead and probably add down here a... we can try like a color balance also, to just give like the overall thing like some yellow or some more of like a bluish tone. That often does work if you like. Here, let's make it a tiny bit more red and then just push in a little bit more. Let's see, so it's too much. I often do this super subtle. Yeah, literally just add, here, you can barely see the difference, but I'm just pushing in like the tiniest bit of red, just +3. And then finally, if you want, you can also play around or with exposure or with the levels. In case you like want to bring out a little bit more contrast or a little bit more light. Actually, I feel like mine is already maybe just give it like the white slider a little bit to the right. And then the center slider a little bit to the... white slider a little bit to the left. And then the center slider a little bit to the right. There we go, see? So that just pushes it out a little bit. And there we go. So we can now just go ahead and we can do like a save as. And you can just say, like, I don't know, final_A. Save it. Okay. And there is our final render. Now, this of course was done really quickly. We did it in 30 minutes. I would recommend if you really spend your time on it, you can probably get double as good. And you can really just make everything perfect. But that's about it. So I hope that this tutorial was useful for you. If it was, of course, do the whole YouTube stuff, like subscribe, like, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And we have much more in-depth courses and also a few websites where you can get free resources. The links to all of that stuff is into the description below. So I hope to see you next time.